Hello and welcome back to Forensic Bites. Today we're going to be talking about hidden knowledge of illicit drug manufacture, or to phrase it a different way, how information relating to illicit drug manufacture is protected within the forensic sciences. So forensic scientists need to know exactly how illicit drugs are being made, because this is an important source of intelligence that they can use against criminal networks. Essentially, when you analyse a drug batch, you can find trace impurities that give you information about how that batch was synthesised, such as from small amounts of unreacted chemical precursors, or crystallisation solvents, or small amounts of catalyst left over. By matching all these impurities together, you can say that certain batches came from the same source. You can also use that information to figure out what synthetic route was taken to make that drug batch. And they're especially interested in any innovations or new methods of illicit drug synthesis. And overall, that information can be used to disrupt supply chains by restricting access to whatever chemicals are being used to make certain classes of drugs. And this is most relevant when dealing with the most easy to manufacture illicit substances, which typically are the amphetamine type stimulants. Now, this data is a little bit out of date, but amphetamine production is a bit unique in that it's usually carried out near to or within the country wherein those drugs are going to be sold. So from the slightly out of date information, amphetamine production is concentrated in East and Southeast Asia, North America, and to a lesser extent Europe. And if you focus on ecstasy alone, it's slightly more concentrated in Europe. Slightly more recent information, this time drawn from Australia. The main origin point is Thailand, with other key areas being Malaysia, United States, Mexico, UAE, Korea, China, South Africa, Canada, and the United Kingdom. So in most of those instances, amphetamines are being manufactured within the countries that they're going to be sold, or in their neighbouring countries. So many drug classes, there's a trend whereby drugs are made in developing countries and then transported and sold to first world countries, where you would see the most profit. Not so much for amphetamines, where oftentimes production is situated within the countries wherein it's going to be sold, or in the neighbouring countries relatively close by. So forensic scientists need detailed and accurate information about how drugs are being produced. If they're going to leverage this intelligence, they need to share that information relatively widely between different jurisdictions and even between different countries. However, this creates an information sharing problem, as sharing that information too broadly would be counterproductive. One thing forensic scientists don't want is easily accessible, peer-reviewed instructions for how to manufacture illicit drugs circulating in the community. Now, the traditional gatekeepers for chemistry and chemical synthesis are the big publishers, with the selection shown over here. They have a long track record of taking research and preventing its dissemination behind paywalls, but these guys are definitely not the solution. And there's already many detailed how-to guides for drug synthesis, fairly easily available courtesy of these big publishers. The people submitting these reports are generally university academics, as they live and die under the publish or perish model of academia. Given their jobs rely on publishing in these journals, they might not be as scrupulous as they should be considering the information that they are providing. And the big publishers themselves are fully profit-oriented. They will happily provide any published work provided you pay the fee. And one of the trends in academia is actually a push towards open access, which effectively eliminates even that small fee. So here's a quick example from Elsevier, a review of impurity profiling and synthetic routes of manufacture for methamphetamine, MDMA, amphetamine, and two other less common derivatives of amphetamines. If you want to read this paper, well, all you have to do, academic and personal copy, costs you about $40 and you get a downloadable PDF version of the paper. So is this an issue? Well, yes and no. The justification the academics would probably provide is that these methodology-based papers are written for scientists, meaning that the chemicals you begin with are classed as fine chemicals, meaning you need to source them from chemical industries. They would probably also argue that the procedures require advanced scientific equipment and methods to reproduce. Therefore, the hope would be that only scientists would be able to replicate any work they publish, and surely scientists can be trusted. I suppose in defense of that, if you were to take a fine chemical approach to drug synthesis, it is going to quickly draw attention in well-policed countries. Here's an example of an end-user declaration I had to fill out recently for a chemical classed as a drug precursor. The request needs to go to a trusted institute. You have to provide detailed end-use information, so you need to explain exactly what the chemical is going to be used for. I had to provide them with all my information as well as a copy of my driver's license. So you'll be providing a lot of very detailed information about who you are and who you work for before you'll get any of these fine chemicals. Similarly, purchasing scientific glassware and scientific equipment, less restricted, so you theoretically can make those purchases, but police have long established relationships with those sellers, and if you're buying suspicious amounts of very large glassware, they will pass that information on to the police along with your details. Now, these 2 points apply in well-policed countries. In less well-policed countries, countries with corruption problems, especially countries that have large drug manufacturing or chemical manufacturing industries, getting around this is going to be relatively easy. And even if you do believe the argument that non-scientists would not be able to replicate academic works, it's quite likely that those publications do inform secondary searches of the internet, looking at the broad synthetic strategies that they outline. So are there stricter gatekeepers out there? So if we move away from academic drug synthesis and focus instead on the backyard drug manufacture, so clandestine laboratories, how criminals are actually manufacturing illicit drugs, all of a sudden the information becomes significantly better protected. So the topics that will be covered in these works would include things like what are the illicit drug synthesis trends going on in the community, what methods are they using, what chemical feedstocks are exploited, and how are these clandestine labs being constructed. Arguably, this is more dangerous information that could be more easily utilised by criminals planning on setting up a new operation. This kind of information is published in restricted journals that not even academics have access to typically. These journals are run by the organisations that actually investigate clandestine laboratories and clandestine drug manufacturing. So here's 3 organisations. Probably the biggest is the top one, the Clandestine Laboratory Investigating Chemists Association. They literally have methamphetamine featured prominently on their logo. And most federal and state policing services will have their own teams dedicated just to investigating clandestine laboratories and how illicit drugs are being made. These organisations publish their own peer-reviewed journals for a restricted readership, basically just the Clan Lab investigation community. Topics discussed are what I outlined before, relevant trends, research regarding clandestine laboratories and the products that they are making. It's only available to members. There is no general circulation. So the goal here is to prevent the information from leaking out into the community. There are also face-to-face meetings for clandestine lab investigators where they talk about all of these topics. But again, you will need an organisational email, something that shows that you are associated with law enforcement or have some sort of link to that community. If you don't make a booking with an email linked to such an organisation, you are very unlikely to get an invite to one of these conferences. So to conclude, while there is readily available information on illicit drug synthesis, the really damning stuff is held back in restricted access journals. Meetings and conferences involving the real experts who have deep knowledge of this subject also restrict who can actually attend those meetings. Probably the weakest link in all of this are academics and the traditional publishers, who provide more information than they probably should, while the publishers will happily sell information that arguably shouldn't be disseminated. That's all I have for today. Thanks for listening.